Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm Tami Stackelhouse, fibromyalgia coach, author, and founder of the International Fibromyalgia Coaching Institute. The goal of this podcast is to empower you with access to the dream team of experts and coaches I've discovered are key to living the fibro life you love. From the comfort of your own home, and maybe even your pajamas, I'll help you take back control of your life and health. To help out with fibro fog, I always include full show notes and additional resources at fibromyalgiapodcast.com. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhouse, and this is episode 118. In today's episode, I interview Dr. Izabella Wentz, author of the new book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol. Adrenal function, or adrenal dysfunction, is a major contributing factor to fibromyalgia symptoms. Honestly, I've never met someone with fibromyalgia who didn't also need some healing for their adrenals. In my own journey, supporting my adrenals and correcting my adrenal function was one of the things that gave me a huge step forward in feeling better. I know the information shared today will help you feel better too, and probably a bit validated. Dr. Wentz shares why exercise might not help and why sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night does help. I don't know about you, but just hearing that made me feel very seen and very validated. Now, let me introduce you to today's guest. Dr. Izabella Wentz is a compassionate, innovative, solution-focused integrative pharmacist dedicated to finding the root causes of chronic health conditions. Her passion stems from her own diagnosis with Hashimoto's thyroiditis in 2009, following a decade of debilitating symptoms. As an accomplished author, Dr. Wentz has written several best-selling books, including the New York Times bestseller, Hashimoto's Thyroiditis, the #1 New York Times bestseller, Hashimoto's Protocol, and the Wall Street Journal bestseller, Hashimoto's Food Pharmacology. Her latest book, Adrenal Transformation Protocol, was released in April 2023 and focuses on resetting the body's stress response through targeted safety signals. As always, I want to remind you that information included in this podcast is not meant to be considered medical advice, nor is it intended to replace consulting with a qualified physician or other healthcare provider. That said, there are many things we talk about today that you can absolutely try for yourself at home. We also hope that you'll take what you learn and share it with your providers. Be sure to stay tuned after the interview for some additional free resources, including a free gift from Dr. Wentz. I'll have those for you right after the interview. Hi, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the Fibromyalgia Podcast.
Hi, Tami. Thank you so much for having me. What an honor and a joy to be here with you.
Oh, it's awesome to have you here too. I am so looking forward to talking about adrenal dysfunction and your book that just came out this year, Adrenal Transformation Protocol. So let's actually start with, how did this book come to be? Like, I know you have a little bit of a personal reason there. So why don't you share a little bit of your story?
Sure. So I am a pharmacist by training and was experiencing some, mystery symptoms during my 20s that nobody could really help me with. I was having chronic fatigue syndrome. I was having pain in both of my arms, hair loss, panic attacks, irritable bowel syndrome, acid reflux. It was just, in my 20s, I felt like my body was falling apart. And I got on this journey of finding out what the root cause of what was going on with me was. It ended up being Hashimoto's thyroiditis and autoimmune thyroid condition. Being a pharmacist, I thought, oh, I can take medications for that. That's exciting. There's my solution. If only if it were that easy, right?
Right.
Medications helped a little bit, but as many of us with thyroid issues or fibromyalgia know, it's not, the medications aren't the be all end all. And so I started to really unravel the layers of what was going on within my body. and got myself into remission eventually. One of the things that I did to get into remission was supporting the health of my adrenals and supporting my stress response. And this was something that I thought I had figured out. I had, some integrative protocols that I worked with. They really focused on using specific hormones. They focused on getting 10 to 12 hours of sleep for 30 days straight, quitting coffee and all kinds of caffeine. And I had this plan that I used on myself and I used with clients. I shared in my books. And then when I became a new mom in 2018 and had my beautiful son, I felt like my symptoms crept up again. Something that a lot of people say, oh, he slept like a baby. And I'm like, yeah, I used to say this all the time, but as a mom, like babies, they don't sleep for like longer than like 2 hours at a time, right? And then they wake up and they're hungry and somebody has to care for them and put them back to sleep. And so sleep deprivation is one of the fastest ways to get yourself into trouble from a stress response, from adrenals. And it's a really great way to have a flare up of your autoimmune condition. And so I just felt myself like really not doing well. And then I didn't have the previous resources available to me. So I couldn't just sleep because I was taking care of a newborn, and I couldn't take hormones because I was, nursing a child and I didn't want him to grow like chin hair and chest hair and anything weird, right? Like you don't know what kind of hormones, what kind of effect they can have. And then caffeine just wasn't really an option. And so I wanted to figure out if there was another path for me to create energy and balance in my body. And I ended up coming across some of the strategies that I share in the Adrenal Transformation Protocol, and hopefully we'll be able to share a little bit more about them today. They are something that I utilized with people with Hashimoto's and fibromyalgia and people with chronic fatigue syndrome to really help recover a lot of symptoms in 3 to 4 weeks. I'm talking about fatigue, brain fog, trouble waking up in the morning, pain in the body, insomnia, kind of low libido, that feeling of wired but tired. And this is kind of, what led me to wanting to get the word out and really talking about something different than thyroid, although people with thyroid issues still really do need to focus on adrenals as well.
Yes, that was actually going to be my very next question for you. Because those two things go together, like you have to treat them together, right? I'm a Hashi's girl myself, And if you treat your thyroid, take thyroid meds without treating your adrenals, it can actually make you feel worse, right?
Unfortunately, that's the case. And I've seen too many of my clients going into this, I'm going to take medications and I'm going to feel great. And they start the medications and they do feel better at first. And then something kind of kicks in where all of a sudden they're like, I feel worse than when I started the medications. I'm just like more tired. And they go back to their doctors and they're like, okay, I think I need to test my hormones because I probably need a higher dose of medications. And then their thyroid function will be fine based on the tests that the doctors are doing. And they're kind of left wondering like, well, what's wrong with me? The conventional medicine doesn't really have an answer, but I mean, pharmacology and just when you really study and look a little bit deeper, the answer is pretty clear. So cortisol and thyroid hormones have an interactive relationship, right? And so when somebody is low in thyroid hormones, their cortisol metabolism is going to slow down. That means they're keeping their cortisol around longer. We typically hear cortisol is bad. It's our stress hormone. So just like with anything, it's a balance. We actually do want cortisol in healthy amounts. We want a little bit more of it in the morning to help us wake up. And we want like a gradual decline of it to have low levels of it in the evening so we can get restful sleep. Now, too much cortisol can be problematic, and then too little cortisol can be an issue. Typically, women with thyroid issues, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, they're on that low cortisol state. And what happens is a person who's hypothyroid but unmedicated, they will have extra cortisol, right? Just because their cortisol is not breaking down as quickly as a person with normal function would. And then they take the thyroid hormone medications, and that can actually normalize the metabolism of cortisol. And so what that means is then their cortisol deficiency could be unmasked. So then they actually can have that crash where they're like, all of a sudden, I'm really tired now, but this was supposed to give me more energy. What is happening? And it just kind of the thyroid meds, I'm not saying we shouldn't take them, but I'm saying it's like, we don't just have to fix one thing. There's a whole feedback loop in the body. Then when we shift one thing, we oftentimes have to fix a few other things to really get a person thriving. And big part of that is supporting that adrenal.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I know both of those things were really huge in my own recovery, finding out that I had autoimmune thyroid, treating that, but also treating my adrenals. Now, one of the things that I wanted to talk with you about is a little bit about terminology. When I was diagnosed, when was that? 2007, I think I was diagnosed. My doctor at the time used the term adrenal fatigue. In fact, she said if she looked in the dictionary, she would find my picture next to the words adrenal fatigue. But that's not really the best term to use, correct?
Yes. So I feel like it's a very convenient term. It's a very descriptive term because it's like you're tired and fatigued, and that's coming from the state of your adrenal function and hormone production. But I guess if you're really wanting to get into the terminology, I feel like hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis dysfunction is more of the correct term from like a nerdy physiology standpoint. And I tend to call it adrenal dysfunction. And I'm not big on terminology, but the thing that can happen is people will say adrenal fatigue and then they'll go to a doctor, like a conventionally trained doctor, and they'll mention that word. And then they'll be told that it doesn't exist, or they'll be tested for adrenal insufficiency, which is Addison's disease. And then they'll be told that they don't have it. So I guess it's convenient to perhaps talk about that when we're talking about what are we actually trying to talk about here? Are we talking about a disease state? Are we talking about body stress response, right? Are we talking about something that's recognized by conventional medicine or something that's more relevant in functional medicine or integrative medicine or that lifestyle optimization type of approach?
And I also think too, we should talk a little bit about what that even means, because it's not like your adrenals don't work, right? Like if you go to your doctor and you say, I think there's something wrong with my adrenals, and they run the tests they would normally run, you're going to look normal because they do work. They're just not working quite right.
Yeah, you're going to look normal, but crazy, right? It's like,
Yeah.
So there's a really important distinction. Addison's disease, adrenal insufficiency, is what happens when a person has damage to their adrenal glands. Generally, more than 90% of the adrenal glands have to be damaged for them to not be able to produce enough of our stress hormones, most notably cortisol. This is something that's very rare. President John F. Kennedy, I feel like, was one of the most famous people that had this condition. Somebody a little bit less famous was my dog Boomer, who also had Addison's. And it's something that does require hormones for lifelong. And it can be a life-threatening condition. If a person is not taking hormones for it, they can die, right? And it's generally something that most doctors would recognize because a person would be debilitated, right? So it's usually like an emergency room situation, kind of intensive care situation when a person is diagnosed where their body just doesn't make enough cortisol. And so that's typically when, the conventional docs hear the word adrenals, that's what they think of. And that's what they'll test for. But that doesn't really help us when we're talking about this like stress dysregulation, which is adrenal dysfunction. And what adrenal dysfunction is an adaptation to having too much stress over a long period of time, where essentially the communication between our brain and our adrenal glands that secrete our stress hormone, that pathway just isn't working as well as it should be. Perhaps we had just way too much stress, and it's like the brain is like, okay, I'm not going to tell the adrenals to produce more cortisol. You'd be producing cortisol all day, every day, all night. And it just ends up being more of a broken pathway rather than a broken organ. And so we really need to focus on healing that pathway. And I feel like that's the big distinction there.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And, I was just thinking as you were talking about, too much stress potentially causing this. Fibromyalgia pretty much always comes with some kind of trauma, whether that's physical, emotional, chronic stress. That was me, chronic stress. So it seems to me that pretty much if you ended up with fibromyalgia, you also ended up with something happening that would put your adrenals in this miscommunication state. And having said that, I've never run across anybody who didn't also have adrenal issues, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we think of stress, I know typically most people think, oh, it's like my annoying boss is just awful to me and that's causing me stress, right? That's, of course, an obvious source of stress, but there are other sources of stress, such as trauma, maybe stress that you had in your childhood. You may not even remember that it happened, but something may have set you off where your body has kind of shifted. And rather than being able to go back between like fight or flight to rest and digest state in adequate amounts, it kind of shifts the scale more to be in that fight or flight more so than it should be. And so you end up with not healing properly from injuries, right? Not recovering properly from whatever normal physiologic processes that the body does or normal activity. And this is very common in people with autoimmunity, as you mentioned, fibromyalgia as well. And then there could be stressors like inflammatory stressors. So it's like if you have an injury that's constantly causing you inflammation, that could be one source. But it could also be things like an infection in your gut that's causing low grade inflammation. Or potentially if you're eating a super inflammatory diet, whether that is, excessive omega-6s or that is eating foods that are personally inflammatory to you. These are going to be some sources of stress. Things also that people typically consider to be good, like working a lot, right? Overworking can be considered stress, over exercising, right? Not eating enough foods. These are all potential sources of stress as well.
Mm-hmm. And I think we forget that good things can be stressful too, like you mentioned, exercise and some of those things. But even like, oh my God, getting married,
Oh my
moving.
gosh, yes. Yes, those are positive
Right?
stresses, but they can be overwhelming, like starting graduate school. I mean, going to graduate school, you've got so many hours that you have to put in, having a family, having young children. I know I personally love being a mom. It's like one of the best things that's happened to me, but also I didn't sleep for 3 years and that's very stressful, right?
Right. Exactly. And, having a chronic illness is stressful, right?
In itself. And other thing is just, kind of the experience of having a chronic illness and perhaps being a woman who has to deal with some of the medical gaslighting, unfortunately, that I know most people that I talk to have experienced at some point where they're told it's all in their head and there's nothing really wrong with you. And we did all the tests and you're the picture of good health. And just stop being so lazy or stop eating so much or whatever that negative messaging we hear that can perpetuate that cycle, of course.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, one of the things that was an issue for me was the wrong amount of cortisol at the wrong time. So instead of being high in the morning, I was low in the morning. Instead of being low at night, I was high at night. So I couldn't wake up and I couldn't fall asleep.
It's such a frustrating and common pattern. I feel like, to describe what a healthy person is supposed to have high cortisol in the morning and it's supposed to go down gradually like a slide throughout the day. And then in the evening, it's supposed to be super low so you can get to bed. And the people that I've seen with issues like autoimmunity and pain in their bodies, they have such a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. Maybe around noon is when they kind of can get going and feel normal. As the day goes on, they'll say they might feel anxious or wired throughout the day. That's usually associated with like a dip in cortisol or a sudden spike up in cortisol. And then in the evenings, it's like you've been tired the whole darn day. And then the evening comes and the last thing your body, like your mind is tired, but like your body, like you just can't fall asleep. That connection is somehow not there. And if they do fall asleep, it could be late or they might have trouble falling asleep. And then they might have waking up throughout the night.
Mm-hmm.
They might have unrefreshing sleep as well. And it's just this vicious cycle because your body heals itself when you're sleeping, right? And if you don't have that time to heal yourself when you're sleeping, you're not getting refreshed sleep and you're going to be tired the next morning. And so people end up on this cycle of like, some of them will start drinking lots of caffeine and then they'll have alcohol in the evenings to try to self-medicate, or other kinds of things like carbs to lower their cortisol at night, or sugar to try to increase it in the morning. And it just is kind of a very difficult pattern to break when you don't really understand what's going on. Because they'll say, everybody tells me that like I would feel better if I would sleep, but I can't sleep, right? And they're telling me to quit caffeine, but like I don't know how I'm going to get through my day. Like I just see no other way of getting through my day than having the 6 cups of coffee, right?
Right. Because you have to function. You have to do something.
Yeah. Yeah. It's your lifeline.
Yeah. So how do we get in that situation with that cortisol curve all messed up?
So a lot of different ways to get there. Definitely, inflammation is the way. So in some of my clients, it's been exposure to a toxin, or it's been exposure to a pathogenic infection that can really set off that inflammatory cascade. And it could be also, slow lifestyle changes. We spend a lot of time in indoor lighting, right? And our body naturally produces cortisol in the morning, but there's something that triggers that cortisol production, and that's actually sunshine and bright lights. The lights in our homes are generally not bright enough to trigger this. You can get seasonal affective disorder lamps or dawn simulator lamps that have that higher capacity of light to be able to trigger that cortisol release. But the best way and the free way to do it is to, when you wake up, try to get outside or try to be outside for a few minutes. Some people like to go hiking. Some people like to go on morning runs. You could just go sit out there and sip on your coffee slowly too. That will work for you too. That will help your body build its cortisol naturally. And then just the light exposure throughout the day. If we're using artificial lights throughout the day, the body doesn't get this contrast of like, holy cow, bright lights in the morning and oh my goodness, it's dark later in the evenings. Then your body's not going to know to produce enough melatonin, and it can get confused and still shoot out more cortisol, which then means you're really not resting, even though you're tired. And so a big part of that is when it gets dark outside, you can use blue blockers, turn off your devices, try to put them in nighttime mode. Any kind of blue light you have in your bedrooms. I know like night lights, they're popular to have, but cover that up so you don't have any source of light. And this can be a really big game changer. It's always like people say it's like so basic, but it actually works to really start shifting your circadian rhythm.
Yeah. Seems like it shouldn't. Like these are so simple, so basic. But yes, very powerful.
Very powerful. And I will say some people are just much more sensitive to the lights. Like, for example, there are some people that can watch television and go to sleep just fine and wake up just fine, and they have no issues at all. Now, that's good for them. But if you're somebody that has trouble sleeping at night, trouble falling asleep, unrefreshing sleep, please try these strategies, right? They can be a really, really big game changer for you.
Mm-hmm. I know for me, those things have been really, really important. My husband jokes with his friends that I'm allergic to light because as it gets darker outside, I am always like dimming our lights inside. So by the time it's, getting close to bedtime, our lights are barely on. But it helps. It helps me actually be able to be tired enough to go to sleep, because it's
Absolutely.
kind of following inside a little bit what's happening outside.
Absolutely. Your body gets this lovely communication from the sunshine and from the darkness on what it's supposed to do. It's getting this huge message that's saying, time to make energy now. And then it's saying, time to make melatonin now. So we're very tuned into that. I used to work with people with rare disorders in my earlier days as a clinical pharmacist. And I remember the biggest challenge we had with a client who had retinal blindness. And so he wasn't able to tune into the circadian rhythm.
Oh,
And he wasn't able to
interesting.
sleep at the correct times. But, most of us do have those abilities that our body can sense through our retinas, the light sources. Is it light? Is it dark? Should I be tired now? Should I have lots of energy? And so this is actually a great way, caffeine way, hormone-free way of getting energy and sleep.
Now, I noticed you mentioned going outside, and obviously there's lots of benefits to outside aside from the sun. But is there something about sunlight coming through the windows versus sunlight outside? I know some glass can be tinted or block UV. Does that make any difference?
It can definitely be helpful. For example, if you sleep in a well-lit room and the sunshine is kind of coming on you, that can be very helpful for waking up in the morning. But really, to get that full benefit, you do need to step outside. So even if you could stick your head out the window or something like that,
Right.
right? Like if you live somewhere high up or sit on a little balcony, if you have access to one, that's going to be a really, really big game changer because the window does, we don't think it blocks light, but it actually does block some lights. Every kind of window does.
And things like sunglasses too. I imagine the ideal would be not wearing those sunglasses because you want all that light to come in.
Absolutely. That's such an important distinction. So stepping outside and making sure that you don't have those sunglasses on. And you don't have to like stare directly at the sunlight and burn your eyes. Please don't do that. It's just being outside and being surrounded in that light environment can be a really, really big game changer. And, whether you're trying to shift your circadian rhythm because you're a night owl and have adrenal dysfunction. And, this even works when you're changing time zones too.
Yes, yes. I actually have some, they're called retimer glasses. I don't know if you're familiar with them. I
Ooh.
actually brought them in case you haven't. They're super fun. So those of you who are listening, you won't see this, but if you watch the video and my lovely space glasses, but they've got lights in them that shine in my eyes. So it's kind of like one of those light lamps, except you wear them around so you can go for a walk or brush your teeth in the morning, go to the bathroom, do all your things while you've got that bright light. And I use those when I travel, and it makes such a difference, particularly going from West Coast to East Coast, when all of a sudden my body 9 o'clock is now actually noon. Right. So, yeah, those kinds of things really do help y'all. So, definitely try some of these tips and see. Now, I know this is barely scratching the surface of Adrenal Transformation Protocol. So, let's talk about that a little bit. The thing that I personally love about helping people with adrenal issues is that there is so much that we can just do on our own. This isn't one of those things where you have to go find a doctor who knows all the things. Like, obviously, a doctor can be helpful, but there's just so much that we can do ourselves on our own to help.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about doing what I do and getting the word out there is because people can be really empowered to take charge of their own health. And I really focus on teaching people how to communicate to the body in a way that the body will understand, right? And so the premise of the Adrenal Transformation Protocol is what are the things in your life that you're doing that are sending stress signals to your body? And so, how do we cut out those stress signals? And then also, how do we send the body safety signals, right? So, just as we do with light, so we're sending the body a signal of, hey, it's bright outside, it's time to wake up and produce energy. And hey, it's dark outside, it's time to produce melatonin. We can do that with foods, we can do that with supplements, we can do that with the actions that we take, with self talk, with a lot of the different things that we do. I have a list of safety signals throughout the book of things that maybe, everybody can incorporate the majority of them because they're pretty easy to add. I think one of them that nobody complains about is adding pleasurable activities. So doing something that you really, really enjoy is actually a safety signal, and that can give you energy, right? So whether that is painting or hiking or scrapbooking or hobby horsing, I don't know. I don't know. People like all kinds of cool stuff, right? And just giving yourself permission to do that, that can actually create so much energy in your life. So a person that might be feeling exhausted, sometimes it's not because of doing too many things, but because you're not doing the right things, right? So you're not doing the right things to give you that energy.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that the flip side of that is worth saying out loud as well. You listening, you getting through the day, you don't feel like you don't have much left. You're spending all your energy like just doing the things that you have to do. You're actually sending that not safe signal, right?
Exactly. If you're doing all of these things that make you feel bad, then you're sending those messages to your body. And I know there's things all of us kind of, how do we deal with them, right? Like, okay, so you just want me to quit my job and live at the beach for 7 years? It's like,
As if, right?
you can, if that's an option to you, I don't think that would hurt. But, in the real world, what do you do, right? So are there ways to make the tasks that you have to do, maybe make them a little more pleasurable? So if you're having to drive in traffic for an hour each way to work and back, can you listen to like a funny audiobook or a really great podcast?
Hmm. Absolutely. I know that makes my drive time so much better. I'm always listening to podcasts or audiobooks and my favorite music station. Like those things all make stuff better, more fun, more enjoyable. Yeah.
Yeah, I personally don't enjoy cleaning. So some of my childhood trauma, my mom used cleaning and she would wake me up like Sunday mornings, every Sunday, like 6 a.m. Time to clean, time to clean. And I was like, oh. So the way that I get through cleaning right now is I'll listen to podcasts or, functional medicine lectures and things that I enjoy. Is if I have to clean, or I just outsource it to my husband.
Right, exactly. That's the best way to get out of things that you don't want to do is outsource them to somebody else. And that, not everybody has that option for all things, but if you do, it is worth it. If there is something that annoys you or is just like not fun, it's worth taking some time to think about how can I delegate this? How can I change this? Do I even have to do this? I do this in my business all the time. Like, is this something I actually have to do?
When I was working on my health, I realized what were some of the things that were triggering me and what were causing me a lot of issues. And I ended up doing really an inventory of what were the things that made me feel better and what are the things that made me feel worse. And, you can't eliminate every single thing, of course. That's not realistic. But I made a conscious effort to try to minimize the things that made me feel worse and try to add more of the things that make me feel better. So perhaps you have some inflammatory foods. Maybe you have some inflammatory people in your life that just being around them, that energy doesn't make you feel better. And just having that permission to change that up, I think can be a really big liberating aspect for your health and well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I totally agree with that. And one of the things you mentioned in your book that I thought was so interesting, and I haven't heard anybody talk about this before, so I'd love to highlight this a little bit. We think of exercise as being good, and your average person out there who doesn't understand fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, adrenal dysfunction will tell you that if you start exercising, you'll have more energy. And that may be true for the average bear. But for us, maybe not so much. And I would love for you to share that part in your book about the different stages you might be in and when exercise is a good thing and when maybe it's not.
Yes, and absolutely the types of exercise matter too, amount of exercise. So typically where my frustration with kind of conventional media and the conventional health articles and magazines that you would hear, a lot of it is kind of tailored to people who don't have autoimmune disease, don't have, Hashimoto's, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome, and tend to be on like the higher cortisol spectrum. So a lot of the content is how to reduce cortisol, where that is one type of adrenal dysfunction you can have, where I would say there's a few different patterns. The healthy pattern is higher cortisol in the morning, gradual decline, low cortisol in the evening. And then there's a few different patterns that can be dysfunctional. One of them is super high cortisol. If that is
just
you,
like
then
high across the board.
Exactly. High in the morning, high in the afternoon, high in the evening, and high at night. And this is typically what I would say is like a rock star cortisol or overperformer. So maybe you are somebody that is like a super driven high achiever. You don't sleep, you drink a lot of coffee, you're always on the go. That's going to be that high cortisol person.
Those guys we think of down on Wall Street, right?
Guys on Wall Street.
Traders.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. And they're the ones that really need to, that exercise can actually help them. Aerobic exercise can help them balance, right? Because they can help to break down some of that cortisol. And then we have some of the patterns like the blood sugar issue pattern where a person will be on a cortisol roller coaster. They maybe start off high in the morning, then they have a dip instead of that gradual decline. So then they feel anxious or stressed or hangry, and then they have a rise and then maybe another dip. And that kind of person, depending, aerobic exercise might be good depending on the time of day, right? But they have to be mindful of how they time it. And then we end up in the patterns that are more common with Hashimoto's fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue syndrome. And that's going to be more of a low cortisol pattern where you have trouble waking up in the morning, you have trouble getting going. And maybe some of the people have high cortisol at night where they're just like, oh, now I can't sleep. And then some of the people I've worked with, they just have even low cortisol in the evening as well. So they're like, yeah, I'm tired at night. I sleep just fine. But like, it's the waking up part that I don't do so well with, right? Mm-hmm. They sleep 12 hours. They fall asleep in an instant. But these individuals, we actually don't want to do the kind of exercise that's catabolic, that breaks the body down, such as aerobic exercise, because it can actually make you feel worse. And you want to focus more on exercise that builds you up, and that's more anabolic in nature, such as strength training or yoga or maybe gentle walking. But even that, you don't want to overdo it because like the key is like a person with that low cortisol, when they do exercise and when they do too much of, a good thing, they do too much socializing, too much exercising, too much fasting, their body can't handle that like positive stressor. And they have to take a few days to recover from that, right? Mm-hmm. That's not how exercise is supposed to be. That's not what fasting is supposed to do. Socializing, you're supposed to feel better after it, right? And the really big rule of thumb is do things that make you feel better, not things that make you feel worse. So if you're doing exercise, you want to make sure you're doing the right kind and the right amount for yourself, depending on what feels good for you. Like I typically say, if you do an exercise, at the end of it, you should be able to say, okay, I could do that whole thing once more. So if it's a hike that you just did, and then you have to take a 7-hour nap after your hike, that was probably too much exercise for you. But if you just did a hike and you're feeling like, oh, I used my body and I could probably do it one more time, that was the right amount.
Mm-hmm. And I think for those of us with fibro too, and probably other conditions as well, sometimes we don't know that it's too much until the next day or even the day after that, right? Yeah. Like maybe you feel great right afterwards and you feel good because maybe did something you enjoyed or, whatever. But then a couple days later, you can't get out of bed, right? So definitely take the big picture for whether it makes you feel good or makes you feel bad. Because sometimes things that make you feel good in the moment don't always make you feel good long run.
Exactly. That's another important consideration, whether that's exercise, food, or socializing. If it's something that takes you a few days to recover from, that's going to be an indication that was perhaps too much for where you are in your ability to handle that stress.
Yep. I love it. So what are some of the other things that are in the transformation protocol?
Definitely building resilience. So my goal is never for people to, live in a monastery in a padded room, only eating ice cubes, right? And
I don't know, that sounds stressful. So
absolutely. I mean, I just want people to be able to thrive in the real world and figure out those messages and how to work with their body to get there. So I focus a lot about resilience. I focus on things like setting up your mitochondria and helping you recover faster. There was a study done on, I believe, D-ribose and electrolytes in extreme athletes, and it showed that it helped them recover from their athletic endeavors quicker. And I was like, this makes sense why it works for people with like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, because everything feels like an athletic endeavor. So things like D-ribose, electrolytes, B vitamins, carnitine can be really, really big game changers for energy levels, for brain fog, for fatigue. I really advocate for using them for people. Then I also talk about really some ways to build resilience. Utilizing adaptogenic herbs can be very helpful. I always say adaptogens make everybody around us less annoying.
Right.
So we can handle stress better when we take
Right.
something like adaptogens. Saccharomyces boulardii is a beneficial yeast that raises our gut resilience so that we become less sensitive to foods and less likely to pick up parasitic infections, even if we are under stress, and less likely to have infections in general. And then there are ways to really focus on getting rid of the things that trigger us, which end up, or I should say, getting rid of our response to triggers, which makes us stronger in the long term. So I focus a lot about identifying what are your triggers, like even emotional triggers, right? So things that really drain your energy, what are they? And what can we do? Can we come up with new coping strategies to help you not react the same way? Can we figure out how to make this awful activity a little less awful for you so it's not as triggering? And then also, what are some roots of that? Are there traumatic roots of you being triggered by this? Can we work on resolving your trauma to make you stronger and more resilient?
Mm-hmm. I love in your book, you talk about positive affirmations and the value of those. But you also say if you've got unresolved trauma and you're just doing positive affirmations, it's only going to take you so far before it all falls apart, because we've got to actually dig in and deal with that trauma. So that may mean working with a counselor, or a therapist, or EMDR, or some of those other types of therapy to actually work on your trauma.
Absolutely. I have a picture of a fish tank with a hole in it and a Band-Aid. And then that just talks about, if you have trauma, right? So you need to really resolve it and work on it. And there's so many amazing modalities for that. And I am a proponent of positive affirmations. The one I personally used on my healing journey was every day in every way, I'm feeling better and better. And there is a lot of research on that positive mindset and on treating yourself with kindness and compassion and the words that we use to speak to ourselves. If you're somebody that's constantly beating yourself up, I know I was in my days, I remember oversleeping and missing a job interview and just beating myself up so much for this, right? And that kind of self-talk, that can be a source of inflammation and stress in the body. And that can just be, adding to that bucket that is really, overflowing with stress and leading to a lot of the symptoms. May not be the only thing, but if it's a simple thing to just, shift that, you absolutely can shift that just through the way that you talk to yourself and treat yourself. That can make a big difference in the long term.
Absolutely. Talk about, sending safe signals or unsafe signals. If you're basically bullying yourself in your own head, that's a not safe signal.
Absolutely. And I feel like many of us don't realize how often we do that. It's like, and you just get stuck in these like automatic negative thoughts where they just keep coming, right? And it's really, it really is incredible what just being kind to ourselves can do, right? And it's like you tune into your body and you rest, your body tells you to rest and you actually rest. I used to be the kind of person that when I felt tired, I was like, okay, I feel tired today. That means I should go to the gym and exercise more. And it was like, no.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know if it's just our society that's conditioned that way, but a lot of times are tuned out from our bodies and what the bodies need and how to communicate with our bodies to get them to function well, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if you're listening to this podcast, you've heard me talk about that at least a dozen times. It's such an important thing. And again, just like covering the little blue lights on your electronics in your bedroom, like it seems like a simple thing to be nice to yourself. And it seems like that can't possibly be the answer, to be nice to yourself, but it is.
And it's additive too. So with every little change, you're going to see some improvement, right? So you can see improvements just by cutting out like negative people out of your life, right? Or you could see improvements by switching your diet around or taking a couple of supplements. And with all these little things, you stack them on top of each other, add some pleasurable activities. And I mean, Tami, I've had so many women that my heart has just been so touched by their transformations, women in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, with just doing the program. And pleasurable activities is probably by far the most favorite one But women are
Sure,
saying, like,
yeah.
I'm running, I used to be like bedridden and fatigued. I'm running up and down my stairs. I have so much energy. And they're like, you just really liberate people's energy and they let go of their symptoms and they're living the life that they were meant to live. And they're doing things that they've always wanted to do. I've had like 80-year-old authors and like brand new
Right.
authors in their 80s and starting relationships, starting businesses, like traveling, doing things that they never thought they'd be capable of doing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, for you listening, is this going to be the answer to all of your fibro symptoms? Probably not, but it will be a piece of it, right? Like there's a lot going on with fibromyalgia, but this is a really important, really big piece to take a look at and start addressing. So tell us about your book, where people can get it, all that kind of good stuff.
My book is called The Adrenal Transformation Protocol, and it's a 4-week plan to resolve stress-related symptoms. And it's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, wherever fine books are sold. And I also have a few books, 3 books on Hashimoto's. Hashimoto's protocol is probably my most popular one, that focus on a 90-day plan to charge of your health and address the symptoms. So Hashimoto's protocol came out in 2017, and my newest book just came out this year.
That's great. Congratulations. Congratulations. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. I mean, because I know that a lot of this was born out of your own experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. It's been my pleasure it's difficult to get the diagnosis and struggle with all the symptoms, but, I can truly say that today I could say that this was a gift, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's a saying that said somebody once gave me a box full of darkness, and it took so long to realize that this too was a gift, because I feel like it led me to find what I was meant to do. I was meant to help myself heal and now help others do the same. So in a very strange way, I feel like, getting that Hashimoto's diagnosis and those symptoms was a gift.
Yep. I can totally relate to that. Fibromyalgia was my gift, right? I mean, I think about how much of my life would not be the way that it is without that diagnosis. And it's absolutely been a gift. And at the very least, if you can't call it a gift, it's a teacher, right? And it's going to teach you a lot of really important things.
Absolutely. It has been one of the greatest teachers I've had, I would say. And I'm happy to be able to share my experiences. My wonderful team, they kind of make a joke. If I'll have another symptom or something come up, I'll be like, oh, great. I have more things to write about, right? So.
Yes, I remember saying something like that too. Oh, yay. This is something else I can tell my clients about.
Yeah, I can relate to this now in a much bigger way and
Yes,
help people figure it out and
absolutely.
help
Yep.
others with it
Yep.
too.
So, as we wrap up, I would love for you to just take a minute and talk to that person listening who is like, oh my goodness, I can relate to all of those symptoms she's been talking about, feeling lost, feeling frustrated, and just talk to her for a minute from your heart.
Ah, man, I'm so sorry for what you're going through. And I really hope that you take some time to educate yourself and figure out some things that you can incorporate into your lifestyle. Give it a try, give it a few days, maybe a few weeks. And soon enough, I hope that you'll start feeling better and seeing some results. I know, Tami and I have both had our own health journeys, and there are a lot of solutions for you out there. They may not be at your doctor's office, unfortunately. They may not be at your pharmacy, and you might have to, really educate yourself, but you're totally worth it.
I agree with that 100%. And that is a good way to leave it. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your story and your knowledge, and hope to have you back sometime.
Oh, thank you so much, Tami, for having me. Thank you for your work in the world. Thank you for empowering so many women. And thank you for having me.
And that wraps up my interview with Dr. Izabella Wentz, author of the Adrenal Transformation Protocol. After we stopped recording, this always seems to happen, but after we stopped recording, Dr. Wentz offered to share a free gift with all of you. She has put together a guide to help you heal your adrenals called the ABCs of adrenals. In this guide, you'll uncover how to replenish key nutrients and build resilience so your body can handle life stressors and get rid of miserable symptoms. To download your free copy, visit today's show notes at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/118. We'll have the link there. We will also have links where you can get Dr. Wentz's books on that same page, and I'll also include where you can find those retimer glasses I modeled on today's show. If you're just listening to this on audio, you really missed out. You can see my awesome space glasses in the behind the scenes video of today's interview. Just go to our show notes page, fibromyalgiapodcast.com/118. You know, many of the things Dr. Wentz shared today are the same things I've been talking about in all of our episodes. Things like episode 13, how to add more joy into your life, which includes a walkthrough of an exercise I use with my clients to help them add more pleasurable activities, more joy into their daily lives. In episode 47, Write Your Body's Owner's Manual, I give you tips and a walkthrough, a worksheet on how to uncover what helps you feel better and what makes you feel worse. There's also episode 81, Befriend Your Nervous System with Sarah Kleiner, and episode 41, Post-Traumatic Growth in Fibromyalgia with Dr. Robin Pfaff. As always, if you need help implementing some of the lifestyle changes mentioned in today's episode, consider scheduling a consultation with me or with one of my students or coaches. A certified fibromyalgia coach is not a doctor, so we are not going to replace working with your doctor, nor are we going to replace the information you're going to find in Dr. Wentz's books. But we do understand what it's like to live with these symptoms and the struggle to change your lifestyle and habits. We can give you tips and tricks from a fibro perspective, walk beside you, and encourage you as you're making those changes. You can schedule a consultation online at findafibrocoach.com. And if you're somebody like me, someone who likes to dig deep and learn all you can about a particular topic, consider enrolling in our Certified Fibromyalgia Advisor training program. In this class, I even spend an entire module teaching you about adrenal function, adrenal dysfunction, and how you can help your adrenals heal. To learn more about our training programs, go to bafibrocoach.com. And of course, links for all of that is going to be on today's show notes at fibromyalgiapodcast.com/118. Now I've got this week's listener shout out for you. This comes from an email from Lori, who says, I have been listening to and enjoying your podcasts. There aren't any fibromyalgia doctors around here, and I've always been told there's nothing that can be done for fibromyalgia. Thank you for your podcast. I have learned more in this last week and got more fibromyalgia management tips than I have for 20 years. Thank you again. And thank you so much, Lori. Yes, there is a lot that can be done for fibromyalgia. Just because your doctors don't know how to treat fibromyalgia, don't know how to treat fibro effectively, doesn't mean that there aren't things that can be done. Hopefully, you all have heard a lot of that in our last episode, 117, with Dr. Ginevra, where she talks about her mission and passion, sharing that information with providers so that hopefully they can be better help to you. But in the meanwhile, I am here. The podcast is here, and we really are thrilled to hear that you are getting some good management tips and learning what can be done to help manage your fibromyalgia. We will have more great episodes coming up shortly. Thanks so much. We'll see you back here next time. And that wraps up another episode of the Fibromyalgia Podcast. I'm your coach, Tami Stackelhaus. For daily doses of hope, inspiration, and practical advice, come hang out with me on Facebook. Visit facebook.com/fibrocoach to find my personal coaching page and connect with me directly. To find the show notes, additional resources, or to schedule a consultation with me or one of my coaches, visit fibromyalgiapodcast.com.